Hey everybody, Dave Bazanko here, and today I'm going to tell a story about the greatest fear that every beginner triathlete has, and that's the fear of open water swimming. Now, I'm going to share a story that actually happened to me in Louisville in 2011 at my first Ironman. Now, I was traveling from Ontario, Canada, down by car to Louisville, and I live about maybe 30 minutes from Buffalo, New York. And there was another gentleman who was the exact same age as me. I was 46 years old at the time. His name was Mark Wezka, and he was traveling with his family down to do his very first Ironman triathlon as well, which was the same triathlon. It was Ironman Louisville. And when I got to Louisville, the Ohio River was warm. It was a non-wetsuit race, which simply meant that it was too warm and you couldn't wear your wetsuit in the water or you would have overheated. So you had to swim the distance, the 4-kilometer distance without a wetsuit. And that meant that you had to be a little bit of a stronger swimmer. It was a point-to-point race, almost like a loop, because you had to swim with the current down the Ohio River. But let me set the stage for race morning. It was what we call a rolling start, which meant that athletes didn't go in the water in a mass start. We all went into the water sort of one by one in a lineup, and just as you got to the start, you jumped in the water and you went. Now, in Louisville, the way they start the race, it is very much a park. It's called the Great Lawn, where all the athletes line up in this big snaky line, and you all sit on the grass and wait for the race to start. And when it starts, you kind of get up and you start moving in a line. And as you get closer to the water, there's actually a row of docks, and you pass the sheriff's boathouse and then probably about 40 docks with large boats. And then you're in this river. And if you've ever been to Louisville, it's right by the rowing boathouse for I believe it's for the Women's University Rowing Club. That's exactly where it is. And you jump into the water, and on this body of water, this portion of the Ohio River, there's an island that runs along the outside or just across from the docks. And so we would walk in this big snaky line. We would get to the very last dock, and then you would jump in the water. You would swim in between the island and the docks, out to the top of the island, turn, and then you'd swim downriver to the bridge and off to shore and out into the race. Now, the only thing that we're thinking about that morning is really, today I'm going to be an Ironman. You're focused on your race. And as I was getting to the sheriff's boathouse, I noticed that there was a lot of commotion going on. People were running back and forth, but I really didn't care, didn't know what was going on. I thought something was happening in the parking lot. And all I could think of is, today I'm going to be an Ironman. And I made my way down to the start. I jumped into the water and I started swimming. Now, I didn't get to the sheriff's boathouse, which was about 40 docks down the water, until I noticed there was something wrong in the water. Now, I know that in some races, people who have panic attacks and aren't trained for or haven't trained to handle a panic attack in the water, these people are allowed to grab onto the lifeguard's paddleboard so long as you don't advance yourself further in the race. So I happened to notice a lot of people holding on to the paddle boards. And I was thinking to myself, I couldn't believe how many people had come to the race unprepared to do the swim, and how many people right off the bat had to hold on to the paddle board. Now, at that moment, they actually stopped the race, my wife told me afterwards, to get an athlete out of the water. That was Mark. Mark was about maybe 2 minutes ahead of me in line. He got in the water, he swam about 50 yards and had a massive panic attack, which led to a heart attack. And unfortunately, Mark died in the water. And the commotion was the rescue team trying to get the ambulance located, to get Mark out of the water. And my wife said as soon as I went in the water, within 30 seconds, they stopped athletes from going in the water so they could get Mark out of the water. And then they let the rest of the athletes resume. But the thing of it is, I didn't even know this happened. My wife didn't piece this together. I literally 2 days after the race, was at home talking about the race to one of my friends, and they said, "Oh, were you at that race where that guy died?" And I went, "What are you talking about? I have no idea what you're talking about. Nobody died at the race." And he said, "Yeah, I heard a guy from Louisville, or a guy from Buffalo died in the Louisville race." So then I immediately went to the newspaper, and sure enough, there it was. And then I said to my wife, like, "Did something go on after I jumped in the water?" And she said, "Yeah, as a matter of fact, as soon as you jumped in the water, they stopped letting athletes go in the water." And we started piecing the story together. Now, the one thing that I take away from this is I've met beginner triathletes from all over the world. And a very, very common mistake that beginner triathletes make is that they don't practice having panic attacks in open water. Now, you say, "Dave, how do you practice having a panic attack in open water?" Well, it's really simple. When you're competent enough to do the distance of the swim in the pool, go out in the open water with somebody, hopefully with a pull buoy behind you so that you've got a float in case you have a panic attack. But when you have panic attacks, and they're going to happen because you're going to see stuff in the water, somebody's going to swim over top you, something bad is going to happen to startle you. That's going to trigger accelerated breathing. That's going to trigger a panic attack. And when I started this 15 years ago, we didn't really have inflatable pull buoys that we had behind us. My strategy was, if you had a panic attack, roll over on your back because your wetsuit keeps you buoyant. Roll over on your back, look up at the sky, and just collect your breathing. Get back to a regular breathing rhythm, and then roll over and just try to start swimming. Sometimes you swim with your eyes closed if you're seeing stuff in the water that's freaking you out. You just got to get comfortable taking those strokes. I remember my very first open water swim, while I could swim 2K in the pool, because I was training for my first Ironman Muskoka back in 2010, I could swim the distance in the pool, but boy, put me in open water where you're looking at seaweed and fish and snakes in the water and all kinds of gross stuff. Yeah, panic attacks galore. But I look back now, and that's probably such a blessing in disguise for me, because I was able to put into practice a strategy for when bad things happen, not to panic, to relax, and to settle myself down. I've actually put myself in situations where I was training alone up north in very dark water. And I was smart enough to realize as soon as I jumped in the water was so pitch black, I couldn't see my hand in front of my face, much like when I was in Louisville. That water in the Ohio River was so brown, I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. And I literally swam into a piece of rebar that hit me in the chest. And I know it was rebar because I know what rebar is. And I reached down and went, "Yep, that's rebar." And I pushed myself aside and off I went. So, the moral of this story is, if you are going to do open water swimming, if you're going to be a triathlete, part of your training has to include open water swimming. Do not go out and do an open water swim the weekend before you're about to race and say, "I've done open water swimming." That's what Mark did. There was an interview in the Buffalo News newspaper that I read, and the perspective from Mark's father was Mark was an accomplished swimmer, but he didn't like open water swimming, so he never practiced. And what Mark didn't realize was that you are going to have panic attacks in the water. And you have to have a strategy. You have to train to be prepared to deal with that panic attack. So my advice to every beginner triathlete out there right now, I'm in Canada, it's February, it's indoor pool season. But in June, even though the water is going to be cold, put that wetsuit on, get in the water a couple of times, 2 to 3 times a week, especially if you're new at this, especially if you've got a race coming up in June or July. Get in the water, get used to having panic attacks. Make sure you've got a floating pull buoy attached to your waist. I've shown this before. This is my pull buoy right here. I keep it in my swim bag, and that goes with me everywhere. And I wear that religiously now. That will save your life, okay? It will literally save your life. So part of your essential swim gear. So at the end of the day, if you are training for a race, please get in the open water and train. If you don't know where to train nearby, reach out to your local triathlon club and say, "Where do you meet up for open water swimming?" And then meet up and do that with them. That's the one thing that is an absolute must if you're a beginner triathlete, is make sure you train in the water with other people. because there are no lifeguards on duty. You've got to rely on yourself and the people around you to ensure your safety. So it's scary. You know, I literally get sent out to talk to runners to convince them to become triathletes, and their fear is always, I don't like to swim. I don't know how to swim. I will tell you, I have the same fears. I understand how you feel. I felt the exact same way. And what I've found now is probably the best part of the race for me. It sets me up mentally for an awesome race day, but I've got strategies to deal with open water. I know how to deal with a panic attack. I position myself outside of the main fray, so I'm not typically getting swam over. There's techniques you can use to make this a super enjoyable experience. So if you're planning on doing an Ironman, or if you're planning on doing a triathlon this year and you haven't practiced open water swimming yet, drop a comment below. Let's talk about it so that you can have a safe race day experience. Because if you've got the question, I will guarantee you everybody else watching this video this far along has the exact same question that you have. And maybe I didn't answer it exactly the way you wanted me to answer it, but I can certainly elaborate in the comments. So yeah, please like, subscribe, comment, and be safe out there while you're training. And let's make swimming the most enjoyable part of your race day. Bye for now.